I'll never forget the silence after Clayton called me the help at his family's dinner table. His mother laughed. His sister smirked. They had no idea that the company they were celebrating, the wealth they were flaunting, the legacy they worshipped, it all belonged to me. And I was about to take it all back. If you've ever been underestimated, ever been made to feel small by people who should have lifted you up, stay with me. This story gets wild. And please, hit that like button. You'll want to remember this one. My name is Jada, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I'm not the kind of woman who accepts disrespect quietly. I wasn't raised that way. My grandmother used to tell me that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. But somehow, somewhere along the way in my marriage to Clayton, I'd forgotten that. I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping my power. I was wrong. 4 years ago, I married a man I thought I knew. Clayton was charming, ambitious, well-spoken. He came from what everyone called old money, though I'd later learn that money was more myth than reality. When we met, I was already successful. I'd built a career in corporate law and private equity, made smart investments, and had the kind of financial literacy that most people spend their whole lives trying to figure out. Clayton told me he admired that about me. He said he'd never met a woman as brilliant and driven as I was. I believed him because I wanted to. Because loving someone means trusting their words, right? We started a business together a year into our marriage. Well, that's how he tells it. The truth is, I started the business. I funded it entirely from my own accounts. I developed the strategy, secured the clients, built the infrastructure from the ground up. Clayton was the face, the charismatic CEO who showed up to meetings, shook hands, and took credit. And I let him. God, I let him because I thought we were a team. I thought his success was our success. I thought love meant stepping back so he could step forward. But lately, something had shifted. Clayton had become distant, always on his phone, taking hushed calls in other rooms. When I'd walk in, he'd hang up quickly, claim it was just business. There was a name that kept appearing in his notifications, just the letter T. I didn't push it. I should have, but I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, that successful marriages required trust, not suspicion. Then came the invitation to his mother's annual family dinner. Lenore's estate dinners were legendary, not for warmth, but for their cold, calculated displays of wealth and social superiority. I'd been to 3 before, and each time I left feeling like I'd survived something rather than enjoyed something. The microaggressions, the backhanded compliments about my hair, my background, my education, the way they'd asked where I was really from, as if being black and successful was somehow geographically impossible. And Clayton, my husband, would sit there and say nothing. Sometimes he'd even join in with a nervous laugh, like throwing me to the wolves would earn him a better spot in the pack. But this year felt different. There was a tension in Clayton's voice when he insisted I attend, almost like he needed me there for something. Looking back now, I realize he did need me there, not as his wife, as his target. This wasn't just going to be another uncomfortable dinner. This was going to be the night everything I'd built, everything I'd believed about my marriage would shatter completely. And I walked right into it, wearing my best dress and my brightest smile, completely unaware that I was about to be humiliated in front of the people who'd never thought I belonged there in the first place. The moment we walked through those heavy oak doors, I felt it. That familiar chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with the temperature of the welcome. Lenore stood in the foyer wearing pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She kissed Clayton on both cheeks like he was royalty returning from war, then turned to me with a look I'd seen 100 times before. That look that said I was unexpected, unwelcome, and slightly confusing to her sense of order. "Jada," she said, my name coming out like she'd tasted something sour. "Bold. the word white women use when they mean too much, too bright, too confident, too black. I smiled anyway, thanked her, and walked into the dining room where the rest of Clayton's family had already gathered, like vultures around a perfectly set table. Tessa was there, his sister, draped across a chair like she owned the world. She gave me a little wave, her fingers barely moving, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with something that looked almost like amusement. The extended family filled the other seats, along with several of Clayton's college friends and business associates, including Reginald, a man who'd worked closely with our company for the past 2 years. He was the only one who gave me a genuine nod of acknowledgement, and even that felt loaded with something I couldn't name yet. The comments started before the first course even arrived. An aunt I'd met once asked me where I learned to speak so well, as if proper English was a foreign language I'd somehow mastered against all odds. A cousin asked if I did something special to my hair, or if it was natural like that, her tone suggesting that natural was a problem that needed solving. Clayton laughed along. Actually laughed. When I shot him a look, he just shrugged, like I was being too sensitive, like I couldn't take a joke. Then it got worse. Clayton, my own husband, decided to join in on the fun. During a conversation about business negotiations, he said, "Oh, Jada can be pretty aggressive in meetings. You know how it is." The table erupted with knowing laughter. Aggressive. That word they love to use for black women who dare to speak up, have opinions, or refuse to smile through disrespect. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my composure. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Tessa leaned forward, swirling her wine, and said something about how certain people just don't understand family legacy and class, how it's something you're born into, not something you can learn. She didn't look at me when she said it, but everyone knew who she meant. The insult hung in the air like smoke, and I waited for Clayton to say something, anything to defend me. He didn't. Instead, he physically shifted his chair slightly away from mine, as if creating distance would protect him from the association. I stayed calm. I'd had years of practice staying calm in rooms that didn't want me there. I sipped my water, nodded politely, and reminded myself that I was better than this, that I didn't need to prove anything to these people. But then Lenore stood up, glass raised, ready to give one of her grand toasts. She went on and on about Clayton's achievements, about the company he'd built, about the legacy he was creating, about how proud she was of her son's enterprising spirit and business acumen. Every word was a lie, and she didn't even know it. I couldn't help myself. I spoke up, my voice steady and clear. "Actually, I'm the majority stakeholder and CEO of the company." The room went quiet. You could hear the clink of silverware stopping midair. And that's when Clayton stood up, his face red, his eyes blazing with something I'd never seen before. Rage. Pure, unfiltered rage directed at me. "Jada, stop embarrassing yourself," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're here as my wife, not my business partner. Know your place. You're acting like the help trying to sit at the table." The help, he called me, in front of everyone. And his mother laughed. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the kind of silence that comes from shock or sympathy, but the kind that comes from people watching a spectacle, waiting to see what happens next. Some of them had the decency to look uncomfortable, their eyes darting away from mine. Others, like Lenore and Tessa, looked almost satisfied, like this was the entertainment they'd been hoping for all along. No one defended me. Not a single person at that table said a word on my behalf. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, waiting for me to cry, to yell, to make a scene that would confirm everything they'd always thought about me. But I refused to give them that. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table with deliberate care, and excused myself. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I walked out of that dining room with my head high, even though inside I was shattering into 1,000 pieces. I locked myself in the bathroom down the hall, gripping the marble countertops so hard my knuckles went white. I stared at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. When had I become someone who accepted this? When had I let love turn into humiliation? The pain was physical, like someone had reached into my chest and crushed my heart in their fist. But underneath that pain, something else was building. Something cold and sharp and utterly focused. Rage. Not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that makes you calculate. I took a breath, wiped my eyes before any tears could fall, and opened the bathroom door. That's when I saw it. Clayton's phone, sitting on the hallway table, screen facing up. He must have set it down when he went back into the dining room to bask in his moment of dominance. I shouldn't have looked, except I absolutely should have. The messages were right there, unlocked, from Tessa. But these weren't messages between siblings. These were messages between lovers. My stomach turned as I scrolled through weeks, months of conversations, explicit texts, plans to meet up, declarations of love. And then I found the messages from just a few days ago, the ones that made everything click into place like a horrifying puzzle completing itself. They'd been planning this, all of it. Clayton and Tessa had been having an affair for over a year, and they'd decided it was time to push me out of the marriage, out of the company, out of the life I'd built. They'd discussed strategies for making me look unstable, emotionally unfit to run the business. Tonight's dinner wasn't random cruelty, it was orchestrated. They'd planned for Clayton to humiliate me publicly, to provoke a reaction that they could use against me later in divorce proceedings and corporate takeover attempts. Tessa had even written, "Once everyone sees her lose it tonight, we'll have everything we need. She'll be out, and we'll finally be free to be together and take what's ours." What's ours? They actually thought my company, my money, my hard work was theirs for the taking, and they'd planned to destroy me to get it. I stood in that hallway reading message after message, and something inside me went ice cold. The heartbreak was still there, but it was buried now under something much stronger. They wanted to see me lose control? They wanted to paint me as the unstable one? Fine, let me show them what real power looks like when it's wielded with precision. I took screenshots of everything. Every message, every photo, every piece of evidence of their affair and their scheme. Then I put his phone back exactly where I found it, smoothed down my dress, checked my reflection one more time, and walked back into that dining room. I wasn't the same woman who'd left 5 minutes ago. That woman had hoped for the best in people. This woman knew exactly who she was dealing with, and she was ready for war. 3 months later, I barely recognized my own life, and I mean that in the best possible way. The woman who'd walked into that dinner, the one who'd let herself be diminished and disrespected, she was gone. In her place was someone I'd forgotten I could be, someone who didn't apologize for taking up space or owning her power. The company was thriving. Without Clayton's incompetence dragging us down, revenue shot up 40%. Clients who'd been on the fence suddenly became enthusiastic partners once they realized I was the one actually running things. Turns out, people respect competence more than charm. The business publications that had once featured Clayton on their covers now wanted me. I did 3 major interviews, and each time I told the truth about building the company from nothing, about being the strategy behind the success. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with opportunity. But the sweetest victory wasn't professional, it was personal. Clayton's entire world had collapsed, and I didn't have to lift another finger to make it happen. The truth has a way of spreading like wildfire, especially when it involves money and scandal. Once word got out about his affair with his stepsister, once people realized he'd been living off his wife's money while taking credit for her work, he became untouchable. No firm wanted to hire him, no investor wanted to back him. His family, the same family that had laughed at me, had completely disowned him. Lenore made sure everyone knew that Clayton was no longer welcome at family functions, that she was disgusted by what he'd done. Tessa fared no better. Lenore had cut her off entirely, not a penny of inheritance. Her social circle evaporated overnight. Turns out, people who build their lives on pretense and status can't survive actual scandal. She'd tried calling me 24 times in the first month, leaving tearful voicemails about how sorry she was, how she'd made a mistake. I blocked her number. Some apologies don't deserve acceptance. The only person I surprised myself with was Lenore herself. She showed up at my office 6 weeks after the dinner, looking smaller somehow, older. She apologized, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse. She admitted she'd been wrong, that her prejudice and pride had blinded her to who I really was, to what her son had become. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She just wanted me to know that she saw me now, really saw me, and she was ashamed of how long it had taken. I didn't let her back into my life, but I did forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying that anger around was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I forgave her and let her go, and it felt like setting down a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I started a foundation, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for when I was busy propping up Clayton's ego. It supports Black women entrepreneurs, giving them the funding and mentorship they need to build businesses without having to shrink themselves or share credit with people who don't deserve it. Every time I meet with one of these brilliant women, I see myself in them, and I make sure they know their worth from day one. My personal life started opening up too. I went back to therapy, really did the work of healing from betrayal and rebuilding my sense of self. I reconnected with my own family, the people who'd loved me before money and status became part of the equation. And then there was Piper, my assistant, who'd been dropping hints about a coffee shop she thought I'd love. We finally went last week, and I haven't stopped thinking about her smile since.